Hello, everybody. Great to be here. And I have learned a lot by working in New Zealand and Australia about how the need to at least honor the indigenous peoples whose land we occupy. And I'd like to make this acknowledgement. So we acknowledge the Massachusetts and Wampanoag peoples as traditional custodians of the country from which I'm speaking today. We recognize their continuing connection to the land and waters and thank them for protecting this coastline of ecosystems from time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations peoples present today. So thank you. So I'm here today to talk about regenerative development and design. And I want to make sure we really hang on to the word development. Development does not mean building development or real estate development. It means developing new capacity, new capability, new potential. Design follows that capability. So real estate projects, architectural projects, master planning projects, infrastructure projects are an opportunity and acupuncture point to begin to change the world. So one beginning framing of this is this trajectory of ecological design. This has been around for about 20 years or so. So some of you may be familiar with it, but a quick explanation. Here we are in conventional design. And Randy Croxton, the great architect in New York City, says, we build our buildings one step better than breaking the law. Well, we can do better than that. So we go to green, programs like LEED or Green Star or Living Building Challenge. Those things actually help us say we can do better. We can do, instead of just meeting ASHRAE codes or building codes, we can actually improve on them. So 50% better energy savings, 70% energy savings. And if we hit zero, we might be sustainable. But the thing is, we never hit zero, and zero is actually impossible. So until we actually reframe our thinking, we are continually degenerating the planet. Even if we're saving 70% energy, we're still damaging the planet with the 30% remaining. So efficiency is important, but it's not sufficient. So that means that we shift over here to restoration and regeneration. And notice that restoration is a worldview shift between the two. Restoration means that we restore an ecological subsystem, like a wetland or a riparian corridor, or a beach dune system or forest, so that it has the self-organizing capability to evolve. That's what we're doing when we're restoring. We aren't doing much of anything except putting enough relationships and species in contact with each other, that or species in relationship, so that evolutionary processes can proceed. Regeneration is more than that. Regeneration asks what our role is, what the human role is. While regeneration includes restoration in its definition, regeneration is about the RE, regenerate. So this might be generative, we're generating a new wetland, but 10 years later, when we forget about why we did this, or if somebody comes along and wants to build a shopping mall, we need to regenerate our understanding. That's a continual process of rebirth, and cultures, and indigenous cultures, certainly were better at that than we have been. So how do we regenerate? And how do we use projects to regenerate this relationship of humans supporting the health of ecological systems? And it's not that this is wrong, it's just that we need to be working on both slowing down the damage and the green side, the living system design. We often call this the environment. I think it's really important to call it an ecology, because an ecology includes everything. The environment, by definition, is that which is outside of us. An ecology includes us. So this is about an integral approach to life on the planet. Another way to frame this, which will lead into some case studies I want to share with you, is to take this lower level and look at it as extracting value. We pull the nutrients from the soil or from the earth, the spirit from employees in a rotten company, for instance, and we can do better than that. So we slow down the damage or arrest disorder, as Carol Sanford says. This is what LEED is about, slowing down the damage we're causing, and that's really important, but it's obviously not enough. So then we say, well, we can do good, we need to do better. And that sounds good, except that do good actually can be damaging if we are assuming that my version of good is imposed on your version. So the World Bank or the International Development Funds and NGOs that travel around the world and do good sometimes create real damage where they go. If we aren't paying attention to the culture that we're imposing those ideas on, it's a form of colonialism. So then what's the antidote to colonialism? What's the antidote to, or not antidote, but how do we actually frame doing good so that it actually is meaningful and will have staying power? And that's where we move into this one, evolving inherent potential. And that's what regeneration is really about. So the evolving inherent potential, here's Carol's definition: whether with people or life sheds, more than watersheds, life sheds, every living entity asks that we approach it individually to reveal and support its unique potential and capabilities. So what does that mean? Well, certainly with a child, this little girl likely wants to be an airplane pilot. Her essence, her nature of being. We know that if you have children, you know that every child is different and has their unique. We want to fan the flames of their uniqueness so that they actually are inspired and energized. So this is about not imposing our will. I want my daughter to be a tennis player, and then she'll be on a psychologist's couch the rest of her life. We need to actually tap into their innate capability. And land is the same thing. We can the inherent potential of this desertified savanna in Africa and Zimbabwe looks like this 10 years later. Nature wants to recover. Nature has inherent potential. We've just imposed our will on nature and destroyed it as a result. The Loess Plateau in China is a famous example, an area the size of France. A desert, but it wasn't after years, 30 years of working there, I think that's the number. It wasn't until they asked the farmers who actually knew about this place, within 18 months, it went from this to that. And 18 months is kind of a magical figure. We see nature turning herself around once we work with her in 18 months, or not much more than that. So I like to say that we can heal the earth in 18 months if we really get our act together. The inherent potential of the atmosphere during COVID, 2 months after COVID begins, there's what Beijing looks like from that to this. Or this stream, civil engineers' view of a stream in Baltimore, Maryland looks like this 3 years later, once we learn to manage water like it was the forest that was originally there, retaining the water, not letting it rush down and rip the stream bed up, which is the reason the concrete was built there in the first place. So every city is also a living organism. What we're talking about with regeneration is we're talking regenerating life. That's what we're sustaining with sustainability, or living systems. Pittsburgh is different than Barcelona, is different than Seattle, is different than Park City, Utah. We need to know its inherent potential before we impose our will on it. So an example of this is a simple example I always use because it's small enough to be graspable, is the Brattleboro Food Co-op in Brattleboro, Vermont. This is a project we worked on in early 2002, I think, 2002. And it's a grocery store, a cooperative grocery store owned by its members. And they wanted to do a LEED gold grocery store. We asked them the question, do you want LEED or do you want sustainability? Because there's a difference. LEED is about building the capability of working with green technologies and green ideas to slow down the damage, but there's no such thing as a sustainable building. The minute we build a building, we are destroying life. So there's something that we need to do more than just build the building. Well, we certainly need shelter, and we need to make that shelter as the least damaging as possible. There's more that we can do, and a building is an opportunity to coalesce a community to begin to work that way. So we wanted to understand Brattleboro, and we also wanted to understand the food systems. This is a grocery store, and it turns out that Brattleboro is a major center for the localization movement. They even have a march every year. I think they may have stopped it during COVID, but the March of the Heifers and the slow food movement has taken off there. It's a working landscape. There used to be lots of farms in the area. All those green splotches are farms that used to be there, almost all of them that have been abandoned over the last 20 years, or 50 years. And we did about did about 5 minutes of research on where food comes from, since we're working in a grocery store, and it doesn't take very long to find out that the average bite of food in the United States travels 3,600 miles. So we asked the question, what happens if there's a truckers' strike? And they said, well, we're out of business in 2 or 3 days. So no matter what we do with the grocery store in terms of efficient refrigeration cases and low toxicant paints, et cetera, we are still not sustainable if the food system breaks down. They were worried if Whole Foods came into town. What happens if a grocery chain comes into town? They said, well, we're out of business in a year. So what's the one thing that a trucker strike and a grocery store chain can't compete with? And that's local food. And so the first meeting we had with the executive committee, we took a tour through the grocery store. The first bin that we came to in the produce section was the apple bin. And there were apples from New Zealand. There's 12,000 miles. There were strawberries from Chile or strawberries from California and blueberries from Chile. So you get the idea that this was ultimately not a sustainable situation. Yes, we could do a LEED Gold building, but we could do more. So the first thing we looked at is, can we bring back local food? And all the land here was basically overgrazed, overfarmed, overlumbered over 300 years. So the soil was quite degraded. The best soil was in downtown Brattleboro. So we said, why don't we grow our food in downtown Brattleboro? Well, we built on it. Well, no, you've only built on 35% of the land. Where did most towns feed themselves in World War II? Backyard victory gardens. It could actually be incredibly productive. So part of the brief of this grocery store was, let's establish a farming system in downtown Brattleboro, which meant that we had to have an agriculture and soil extension service to teach people how to grow their own food again, a cannery where they would can the food, a daycare center to take care of the kids when the adults were doing that, a credit union to loan money to begin to reestablish farming out here, a forest service to take care of the Forest Service extension, to begin to work on healing the soil in this place, an abattoir for hunters to dress their meat, because this is a hunting area, and, by the way, a grocery store. Now, you can't all do all that at once, but the executive committee got so excited about that as a vision that they hurried up and we did this major presentation to the board way prematurely. And it was a disastrous meeting. And one of the board members said, what is this BS? We just wanted a grocery store. So we were released that night and we realized, well, we need to do something to compensate. So we wrote a long report and we turned it in and didn't hear from them for a year, but almost a year to the date later, which is about how long it takes, by the way, for the mind to shift paradigms. We got a call from the board president saying, Bill, this is the best thing that's ever happened to us. We want to apologize to you. We are developing a 100-year ends policy to incorporate this thinking. And yes, they did build a LEED Gold grocery store and apartment building, but the real work was out in the land. And what he said was the building itself wasn't as important as we thought. It's the system that's important. And this work, just to give you the idea of what development means, this is like a pebble being dropped in a pond or a little puddle. And the radiant energy goes out into Brattleboro itself. But what's cool about this work, when it strikes a chord, it goes out much further. And other co-ops in New England asked the Brattleboro Co-op to teach them what they were doing from this work so that they could replicate that. So that's the power of regenerative work, is when you actually find this leverage point and power of an idea that embraces the system, not just the building itself, you actually spread that energy far and wide. This is how we have get massive change on the planet. So I like to tell architects and engineers, your project is not the project. The project is the system. Your project is informed by that system. So we start with the system first. Also, it's important that we do not start with problems. Climate change, obviously a massive problem, but it's a symptom of not understanding our life and our role in it. Look at all the other damaging activities that we're causing. If we solve climate change, we are still going to take ourselves down pretty quickly. It's actually much more powerful to work with everybody working together and cross-fertilizing thinking to actually begin to work on these issues. And we don't work on them at the scale of the planet. We work on them at the scale of place. Elinor Ostrom, the Nobel laureate in 2009, proved that the tragedy of the commons, Garrett Hardin's famous article, where basically we are going to keep pulling from anything that is for free, people abuse, whether it's the air or the fisheries and the ocean or forests. We just take it, keep taking, and leave nothing for others. How do we actually manage that? And the only way we can manage it really is place by place. The planet's too big, it's too abstract, there's no CEO in charge. But in our places, we actually can see the results of our impact. And ultimately, the people in a place take care of it. So regenerative development is about reassociating people with their place so they begin to actually understand how to work together. And we'll talk about that at the end of this talk. So the system of life is the project. And the system's potential, meaning its ability to be more diverse and resilient, that's what we're looking to do. Because again, sustainability is about sustaining life. The technologies, this is not about more, it's not only about more photovoltaic panels or other green technologies. It's about us tending nature and nature tending us in return. As Gregory Bateson says, the major problems of the world are the result of the difference between the way nature works and the way people think. And so with that in mind, let me introduce a couple concepts about how nature works and how I think we need to reframe our thinking. First of all, is that we need to be working with living wholes, whole entities. And what's a whole? Well, a whole is anything that's singular, alive, and evolving. So a human being is singular, alive, and evolving. The city is singular. A corporation is singular. A college campus is singular. It's an organism. It's alive, it's vital, it's breathing, it's receiving nutrients, it's throwing out waste, and it's evolving. If we work with life on its own terms, life actually runs up. It actually heals itself because it's not entropic. And the power of working with natural systems and even human systems is that if we actually work together in cooperation, it magnifies impact. Fragments, what we typically do is we work on fragments and pieces of life. So we say this building is sustainable. There's no such thing as a sustainable building. A building it's a green building, but it can't sustain life. And because if you imagine, the test is, make a gross extrapolation. Imagine 100 million of these London pickles, City Hall, around the world. Do you have a healthy planet? Not quite. Or imagine 100 billion gallons of sustainable paint. No chance. So the idea here is that a whole is not understandable from its parts. If I want to get to know any of you, I don't look at your liver or kidney or skeletal structure to actually understand who you are. I actually need to know you as a whole being. And the way I get to know you as a whole being is by hanging out with you, by looking at the patterns of your life, observing you. And that tells me a lot more about you than any part or piece. But yet when we work with cities, we work with mobility and climate change and habitat connectivity and security and gender equity, all these kind of fragmented ideas, aspects of life that are never quite integrated together because we're such experts at working in silos and keeping things separate because we think reductionism is the way to solve things. It is not. Dwight Eisenhower, I love his statement. He says, when you have trouble solving a problem, enlarge it. Get a heck of a lot more variables engaged. But people say, well, we need to be practical. And it puts people right back into reductionism. But 50 years of piecemeal problem solving, ever since Rachel Carson and other early ecologists, we aren't doing very well. In fact, we're going backwards, folks. And that's because of simplification, reductionism, fragmentation, hyperbolic or exponential discounting with multiple choices before us. we conserve energy for those most likely to happen. And then we basically don't pay attention to others. So that means that a lot of other things are sneaking up on us. The map is not the territory. So every tool we use informs us about what information to ignore. We ignore so much when we use a fragmented, piecemeal thinking tool. And then abstract thinking is that, sustainable paint or sustainable concrete. There's no such thing. The only thing we can do, or even saving the earth is an abstract thought, the only thing we can do is actually foster life. And the second we keep any activity that we do that destroys life or doesn't compensate by creating actually much more abundance is a negative and downward trajectory. So, I mentioned Eleanor Ostrom before. So we can heal the earth place by place. And real estate projects, architecture projects, infrastructure projects can be high leverage acupuncture points because those projects engage people. And it's people that we're working with. It's activating people that will actually do this work. The other aspect about working with wholes, and I realize I'm dumping a lot on you here, so hopefully you can revisit this in a tape, in a video, is that every whole, so people ask, well, which whole do we work with? Which singular whole? Well, you work with all of them, but understand that based on the issue you're working with, that there are nested wholes. So if you're doing a building, you have the site, that's a whole system. The neighborhood is a whole system, and the watershed is a whole system. So they add value one to the other. The site adds value to this neighborhood or city, the city adds value to the site. If not, then it's a denigrating system. And of course, we can think of many examples that way. The same thing with the city has to add value to the watershed. Where does that ever happen? And the watershed adds value to the city. Unless we are thinking in terms of value-adding processes, we are probably not going to reach a sustainable condition. So one way of working practically with the idea of adding value is to understand the nature of a place. And the place, in this case, this is Salem, Massachusetts. We're working on a development right here. The typical developer's process is to have a transactional relationship with the neighborhoods, and we'll give you a swimming pool if you let us build. We'll give you a new school if you let us build, or we'll give you access to the beach if you let us build. Those kind of quid pro quo relationships, which kind of get results after you have a bunch of lawyers involved. But a much more effective way to work is not work on just the site, but work on the health of a place that everybody cares about. And when people are complaining about a development or concerned about a development, what they're really saying is we're concerned about the quality of life in our city. And so the approach that we take is that the developer is no more or less important than any other stakeholder. No one has the right to build a building. The developer is taking a risk. They do have a right to a profit, but they don't have a right to say what gets built. And this is the premise that we work with all the developers that our clients, is that we're here to protect your profit, but not protect what you want to do. That's a result of understanding the way this system works. And all the stakeholders are basically working in relationship with one another and sharing information and sharing perspectives, not just arguing from a hearing perspective where you get 5 minutes to speak, but you're actually trying to understand one another. Real dialogue happens, real debate, and understanding gets developed to actually come up to a harmonized solution at the end. And in 25 years of practice, we have never seen, when we have worked with this city consistently for at least a month, we have never seen that fail, where there was not a harmonized or reconciled solution to that situation. And that comes about because we are not working on directing problem solving. We are first working with, as Tyson Yoccaporta in the book Sand Talk, which I highly recommend, said you have to start with respect. Then you connect with people. Then you reflect deeper understanding, and then you can direct what gets done. In Western culture, as he observes, we direct. Then when everybody goes crazy and angry, then we reflect. Well, what did we do wrong? Then we meet with people to find out what we did wrong. Then respect gets developed, but by that time it's often too late. So it is so much more effective. And by the way, we work with developers who use this process. They say we have saved, and they save an average of 18 months site plan approval time. This is worth a lot of money in terms of interest rates and legal fees. And by the way, you don't have to hire lawyers when you work this way. So this is actually a much more effective way to engage with respect and care about the system before you decide what gets built. This is a framework that is critical to this work, is that life harmonizes and adapts. And I mentioned this just a few minutes ago. This is why often we get hired, is because people say, well, you can harmonize the difficulties we're experiencing. You're worth 15 years worth of lawyers. So let's unpack this a little bit. All life can be seen as an activating force or a restraining or receiving force. Republicans, Democrats, science, religion, heart, mind, quantity, quality, man, woman, husband, wife, whatever. You can see that there's opportunities, and there's dualism here, maybe opposites, hopefully complements, but that relationship without some other force this is why we have lawyers. They just beat each other up, trying to actually find out and push each other to some winning formula. So compromise is seen as the height of political sophistication. Yet compromise is, as we say about sustainability, is a slower way to die. We compromise here, we compromise again, we compromise again, we compromise again, and we drive ourselves right into the ground. Nature does not work that way. Nature harmonizes, it reconciles. The oak tree does not argue with the willow tree about exchanging nutrients. They know, if you can put "know" in quotation marks, but they certainly work that way, that we're in this role of survival together, and we need to help each other. If you will, you can anthropomorphize that situation. They're always looking forward. They're never looking backwards. They're never saying, well, I didn't really like what you did to me last week, so I'm not going to give you any nutrients. That doesn't even figure into the calculus. The potential is always in front of us and always an opportunity. If we work with problems or existence, if you will, we're always looking over our shoulder and trying to justify it, find out who did what when, and did that work? If it didn't work, then we're not going to do it, even though it might not have anything to do with your problem. So problems are also fragmentary, as we've said before. It creates we try to solve problems. We always end up with 2 or 3 more problems. It's like a whack-a-mole game. You hit one mole and 3 or 4 others pop up. Lots of unintended consequences when we work with problems. But if we all work towards potential, we can actually agree on something and work in alignment with one another. As Dana Meadows, the famous systems thinker, says, we cannot impose our will on a system. We can listen to what the system tells us and discover how its properties and our values can work together to bring forth something much better than could ever be produced by our will alone. So go back to this for 1 second. This diagram often captures the imagination of clients of ours. And so we were hired because of this diagram to work in Pina Del Mar, Chile. This is a 19-hectare site, oil tank farm, that the oil company was going to turn into about 1.5 million square feet of mixed-use development. So 25 activist groups were all calling this developer the enemy, and the developer wanted to know how we could actually harmonize this situation. So the first time we went to visit the client, they took us to their public relations firm, and the public relations firm did a SWOT analysis, a strength, weakness, opportunities, threats analysis. And it was like they were going to battle against all these activist groups. And I said, well, this is not going to work. If you're thinking about the people in the community as enemies, then we're really in trouble. And I met with the CEO and I said, why are you doing this real estate project? You guys are an oil company, forestry company. Why, what's this interest to you? And he said, well, we wanted to give a gift. We want to give a gift to the city. I said, well, it doesn't sound to me like you're giving a gift. It sounds to me like you're going to war. And that was kind of an aha moment. And we then went to see the city, and you can tell that the city is dying in 5 minutes driving around. So we met with, no, by the way, the city, just a little bit of background, the city of Pina Del Mar is just north of Valparaiso, and it is one of the great garden cities of the world. They borrowed the English garden city tradition in the late 1800s, and it was still chunks of it that are beautiful, but most of it has been denigrated into looking like this. The Valparaiso Bay is a dead zone. The estuary, which is the seedbed for the Valparaiso Bay, is they literally turned it into a parking lot. So the spirit of the city has gone away. And so what we do is we look at, here's the site, is that we're looking at the health of this whole system. And when we met with the community members, we explored what the history of this place was, that we could understand its nature, its essence. And we found out for the last 2,000 years that every time a human being and society interacted with this place, the ecological system actually improved, whether it was the early Indians, Aconcagua, Inca, Bada, the Spanish, the British, the railroad industry, the industrial groups, the Garden City movement, until about 30 years ago, it went downhill. And tourism went downhill right after that. This is one of the great tourism destinations in Southern South America. So when that tourism started going downhill, that's when the townspeople began to really worry. And what we found out, though, is by sharing this with them, they said, oh, you're paying attention. And this relationship with community members and helping them understand that we were interested in the health of their city, not just getting this development approved, actually allowed conversations to open up. In fact, they said to us, well, why should we trust you? You're working with the enemy. And so, well, you don't have to trust us, but our goal here is to make sure everybody's working together for the health of this larger system. So those kind of conversations went on for about 3 weeks with about 18 of the groups, and just that alone shifted the from very negative sentiments to helping people be enthusiastic and supportive of getting together. As one woman said, we're grateful for the opportunity to co-create. And then we were off to the races, because now we had a number of people who were interested in working together in this manner, not just working on the project, but working on the health of the city and region. And the developer was the hardest person to convince that this was in their interest to actually work with the city members. In fact, the client said, well, you're not going to make us change the master plan, are you? They had worked on it for about 3 years. And I said to him, we're not going to make you change anything. You're going to want to change it yourself, which actually frightened him even more than he making some kind of pronouncement, meaning that he had to actually reflect and rethink his position and the way he worked. So after this initial 3 weeks, we were able to assemble interested parties to begin to work together. We met with them every 6 weeks, basically over lunch, and helping people understand what different interest groups were working on in their silos. And after about 10 months, one of the members said, I didn't know you guys were working on that. I thought we were working on that, but we're kind of working in the same region. Maybe we should coordinate with each other. And that's the beginning of real change. And people finally realizing that everybody's really interested in the same thing. The executive director of the Chamber of Commerce, who did not want to talk to a couple of gringos from the States, basically told us, we know how it works, buddy. We don't need to talk to you. He called up our client after 10 months and he said, Ricardo, I don't know what you guys are doing, but count us in. This is the first time the city's been able to dream in 30 years. And the mayor, who did not want to talk to us, again, feeling threatened by outsiders influencing the politics of the city, called up a year later and said, we get it, we're good with this, we want to play. So the point of this is it's a practice of engagement, and it takes time. You can't wave a magic wand over a weekend. There's no such thing as a change management weekend. What you can do is, what we need to do is actually take the time to practice. No change happens without practice, whether it's learning an instrument or a language or exercise, it's a practice. And why do we think sustainability is any different? So regeneration is about this continual practice of rebirth. And how do we work together effectively? And part of the process is to actually help people run effective meetings and have real results as a result of those meetings, because so many people are burned out by ineffective meetings. So it's actually really not that difficult in terms of helping people develop their own capacity to manage this system, because that's the deliverable, by the way, with regeneration is not the building itself, but is developing the capacity and capability for people to co-evolve with a system of life that supports them. That's a really big statement. That's really important. So it's an ongoing developmental practice. And not only do we need to be working on what's out there, we have to be actually working on ourselves. And it's not up to us to actually say what spiritual tradition or psychological condition you need to be in. We just ask people to be reflective about their role and about when they're destabilizing a situation and when they're actually contributing. And getting people to reflect on that, it's self-managing, if you will. And so you work on the health of the individual, you work on the ability of a group to work together, and you work on the system of life itself. There's 3 lines of work there. So one of the practical ways of organizing this in terms of managing a whole system is that you're getting these initial leaders of various interest groups: climate change, habitat connectivity, beach erosion, security, equal pay. And there's so many issues being worked on by volunteers and activist groups in every community. So you get the leaders to come together to work as a core team so they can understand what each other's doing. That's the beginning of creating a network of coherence and getting out of silos. Anyway, we don't need to talk about the result of the project. It's ongoing. Let me just summarize this by talking about the basic principles here. Is that regenerative development is a community building activity. And I'm talking not just human community, I'm talking about the community of life in each place. And by working on the idea of place and what the potential for health in each place, that is a very compelling, at least non-divisive framing. It's not politics, it's not race, it's not religion, it's your home. And as a result, most people want to work together for the health and quality of life in their home. Also, we are social beings. We want to be in relationship with each other. The problem is that we don't have meaningful purpose anymore. The church used to be gigantic, certainly in North America, not so much anymore. And so what's our purpose? Well, divisive politics isn't much of a purpose. But if we can work on the potential for health of the places we live, that's a pretty powerful purpose. And that begins to cohere people and allow people to gather together. And then, as I said before, it's a practice. And this is about continually regenerating ourselves and our relationships to develop or to evolve. I'll quote Christopher Alexander, who just passed away recently. When you build or restore, you cannot merely do this in isolation, but must also repair the world around it and within it, so that the large world in this one place becomes more coherent and more whole, and that which you make takes its place in the web of nature as you make it. Thank you. Hope this was useful for you.